Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, Jacqueline from JP Mint, and Greg the Single Guy, bringing you episodes from around the world about the best kept secret in education. You got it, international teaching. Welcome to the show.
Welcome back to the International Teaching Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Kent the Cat Guy, and I'd like to welcome JP Mint. How you doing, JP Mint?
Hello, good morning from Ottawa, Canada. My mom's basement this time.
Spent a lot of time in basements, have you, JP Mint?
You know, Canada has a lot of basements, and they're so cool. I grew up in basements. That might explain, my subterranean leanings.
Joining me today also is the single guy, Greg. How you doing there, Greg?
Well, I'm a little nervous because I keep having to go on video with you guys. This is like our third episode on video or fourth, something like that. And it's crazy for me. But otherwise, hey, welcome back, everybody. Yeah.
Well,
Kent, who's our guest, Kent?
Well, before I introduce the guest, I just wanted to say we kept hoping you'd be better looking, but 3 weeks now, pretty much the same.
I can't change that. I know, it's...
But we do have someone who's very good looking. Our special guest is from the University of Sunderland. Did I say that correct?
You did.
And from Newcastle, I'd like to introduce Greg Larmouth. Greg Larmouth, welcome to the program.
Hello, thank you, everyone. I think it's a bit unfair, Kent, that you lied to the listeners saying that I'm good looking. They can't see it.
They will see it because we're going on video
They
now.
very well might see this, Greg. Greg, why don't you give us the elevator pitch? Tell us a few words about yourself. Introduce yourself to the ITP crowd.
Now you've put me on the spot. So I have worked at the university now for coming up to 6 years, but I was working as a high school English and media studies teacher, hence the interest in podcasting and all things media studies. So I worked in high schools in the UK, decided to take a little bit of a break from teaching and from being in the classroom, but didn't really think it was going to be a permanent removal from the classroom. And then one thing led to another. I got a job at the university working in student support, did a little bit of mental health support with students, and then from there did some peer learning sessions. We built a peer learning scheme at the university, and that kind of got my face noticed a little bit within the university. They trained me up. They've put me through my master's degree, and they have now got me working in the International Teacher Training Team.
What is that? I want to know. International Teacher Training Team. You take international teachers and train them?
Yeah, so this is where I guess my background, what I do, is going to be potentially of some interest to yourselves. So the International Teacher Training Team, we have. How familiar are you with the teacher training within the UK system?
You're talking about like the PGCE,
Nada.
QTS.
Okay, yes. So this is where I don't want to jump ahead and give you too much information. So I'll start at the beginning. We have a teacher training team in the UK where we put through trainee teachers through their PGCE. They gain qualified teacher status in the UK, and that allows them to then go on and teach in the UK and overseas in most cases as well. What we've got in our team is slightly different. We do it all distance learning. We'll do it via Teams, recorded Teams lectures. We'll have lectures, seminars, just as you would in person, but all via Teams. It's a 1 year course. At the end of it, it depends on which course you do. We have a number. We do PGCE. We do the...
Can you explain what that acronym is?
Yes, of course. So the PGCE is the Postgraduate Certificate in Education. In the UK, when you do it in the UK, you get PGCE with qualified teacher status at the end. And then you go into what's classed as an ECT, which is an early careers teacher period of 2 years. What we do with our PGCE is you can either do it with or without the qualified teacher status now. So we've got in the last 2 years, there's been an introduction through our Department for Education for an IQTS, which is the internationally recognised qualified teacher status. So that's beginning to be quite a popular choice within our sort of
Greg, if I
Yeah.
can interrupt you, does that mean that someone who was interested in the IQTS, does that mean that they would get the PGCE first, then the IQTS?
So with the IQTS, you do it all in one. So you'll come out with, you'll do a 1 year PGCE, but you'll also gain the IQTS qualification alongside that.
And to clarify, do they have to be UK citizens to do this?
So this is one of the, because I guess there's a big teacher retention and teacher recruitment issue all across the world, but particularly in the UK, where we're conscious that we have a big issue with teacher retention, teacher recruitment. So I think part of the thought process when the Department for Education came up with this concept was that it would allow us to potentially get teachers from across the globe automatically qualified, already, ready to go into the classrooms to come over to the UK. But obviously the flip side of that is that you are also gaining a lot of qualified teachers all around the world who may be more inclined to go and travel and go to all of the more exotic parts of the world.
Greg, one of the slogans for our program is international teaching, one of the best kept secrets in education. Is international teaching a secret as well, a best kept secret in the UK, or is it something that there's more of a buzz about?
Well, Kent, funny you should ask me that. I'm getting confused about, I'm Greg and he's Greg. So I guess, are you going to refer to me as the single guy? I don't know how to do this.
You will be the single guy, but now that you've spoken up, I would like to remind our audience that Greg Lemoyne, MA, PhD, MD, has written a book called International Teaching, the Best Kept Secret in Education. You can find his book at www.amazon.com or wherever you buy your finer books.
No, I love this question for Greg. Thank you for the post again there, buddy. And I am the new Greg, by the way, Mr. Greg Larmouth. I am the new guy because now we're asking our audience to reach out to us and email us things, right? So they should reach out to us and talk to us after listening to this episode. They should really reach out and tell us whether or not they've heard of your program, or, and maybe somebody that they might ask you some questions on how to get into it. We'll get into that later. But I do have to clear one thing up, and one reason I interrupted, even though it was very funny, I interrupted for a purpose. It's not just one of the best kept secrets. We are the best kept secret in education. That's international educators. I think that it's a great secret that you guys are getting out there. So let's get back. Kent, I think you asked a question before I rudely interrupted, right? Greg, do you remember the question?
I think I remember the question. Although now I'm nervous that I've totally forgotten the question. No, Kent, you were asking how well known international education is within the UK. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right. Yep.
I guess I can only speak from my experience knowing teachers in the UK who've qualified in the UK, who I've worked with, who've then gone overseas and taught as an international teacher. I think it's probably more well known than it has been, but it is very much still a little bit of a secret. Speaking from my experience, I talked to you earlier about how I took some time out of teaching. Now, my intention at that point, I was torn between taking time out of teaching or taking time to teach as an international teacher. But I was a bit of a scaredy cat, we'll call it, and didn't really take that plunge to go overseas and decided to take some time out. Now, I think that's probably part of it. That's, for some people, it's maybe a big jump to go away. I know from my experience at that point, I was recently married, didn't have any children, so it probably would have been the right time for me. And even then, I still had apprehensions and worries about, taking myself and my wife all the way across the other side of the world, potentially. I was also very probably naive about where I could go. So for me, at that point, this was probably about seven years ago. The only place I really knew of that as an international teacher I could potentially go to was the Middle East, namely the United Arab Emirates. That was kind of the big market at that point. And I didn't really know, I hadn't done enough research, I didn't really look into it enough to realise that there are so many other parts of the world that I could have actually went to, which probably would have changed, potentially would have changed my perspective on things as well.
You got a good point, though.
I'll give you another secret, though, Greg, is that there is no wrong time to head overseas. So baby, child of 4, child of 10, child of 17, your children or child can go to the international school where you teach very often for free, and get this great education themselves as well. So there's no wrong time, and it's not too late.
But it's not for everybody, JP, and I think that's what Greg was definitely bringing up. And that's one point, Greg, that thank you for bringing it up. It is not for everybody. And we don't talk a lot about that, but there's certain times that it works better to pull the trigger, so to speak, to actually go overseas and do it. But it's not always going to be for you, right? So hopefully you'll rethink that, though, and at some point, like JP says, even with like a young family, it's still a great choice for many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always something that in the back of my head that I always think, if things were not to work out, or I decided that I wanted to get away from higher education and teacher training, it would probably be the first thing on my list of potential avenues to go down. I think it's always going to be. After
this episode, you're going to be going overseas after this episode, and not just the UAE. I know it. Welcome to our new international teacher, Greg Larmouth, and his family. We're a little bit positive on this show, to tell you the truth. I'm interested to hear about how big this program is right now. Yeah,
so this may come as a surprise then. We have, just at the University of Sunderland, we are one of 8 providers of IQTS, and there are even more providers of the PGC without the IQTS. For the IQTS, the academic year just gone, which was sort of September to June, we had, I think, it would over 100 on the IQTS. Across the PGCE and the IQTS, we had over 500 for the year. So that's, that probably tells you quite big numbers for 1 year. That's not uncommon. Usually we're looking at around about 400 or 500 every year. Yeah.
I know a few friends and few clients that have gotten certified through University of Sunderland, an Indonesian teacher and a Brazilian teacher. And I know they were very appreciative of the fact that they didn't need to be in the UK to do it, and that they're both now teaching in international schools thanks to it.
Yeah, so. It's to be fair, I get that I'm an employee of the university and I work on the team, so I'm going to speak highly of it. But, I think it's a brilliant opportunity for people to upskill who are potentially, what we get a lot is people who, particularly UK residents who may go overseas, travelling. They'll be teaching in local schools where they don't need to have a teaching qualification. And then, they get the bug for teaching. They realise how good it is. But they realise also that they haven't had any formal training, and a lot of our market comes from that sort of area.
Greg, the IQTS, what makes it unique? Is it unique because it caters to people who are already interested in international teaching, or is it a curriculum that has material geared towards international teachers? What makes it unique and different than a PG, than just a sort of a standard degree or certificate that I'm going to get to teach in the UK?
Yeah, so I guess if you wanted to come and teach in the UK, you would need to have the IQTS. But if you didn't want to go to the UK, say, for example, you just wanted to be an international teacher who maybe travelled around a few different countries, but had no real intentions of coming back to the UK, you wouldn't necessarily need the IQTS. The main difference between the PGC without the IQTS and the one with the IQTS really is that it's a Department for Education. It's UK recognised. It's recognised in other parts of the world as well. So there's I can't remember all of the countries off the top of my head, but I could probably pull it up on my phone pretty quickly. I think there's around about 8 countries who have signed up to sort of recognise the IQTS as being, they term it almost like the gold standard, or the golden ticket, when it comes to teaching abroad and teaching overseas and in the UK. But yeah, I guess the main difference for the IQTS versus the PGCE is that recognition, the fact that it unlocks a lot of doors, particularly to come back to the UK, which I think appeals a lot to the British teacher overseas who potentially may think about in the future coming back to the UK and teaching, and not wanting to go through the sort of hassle really of qualifying all over again.
This might be out of your area of expertise, but what about the international teacher that wants to teach in the UK? They can get this and they can get into a classroom, but then there's still an issue of work visa, is there not? And being sponsored by the school?
Yeah, so I don't know a lot of information on this, but what I would say is there is obviously going to be another hoop to jump through, I guess, when it comes to the visa aspect. But I guess the vision, if you will, of the Department for Education, I would imagine, is that if you've got somebody who's highly qualified, highly experienced teacher who now has the recognised IQTS qualification, a school would probably jump at the chance to take somebody of that quality to come into their school, so they would likely cover that sort of issues with the visa. But there are going to be a lot of challenges when it comes to gaining a visa. From what I understand, the UK is one of the most difficult, I think, when it comes to getting a visa. So yeah, I would imagine it would probably not be the easiest route for everyone, but it's an option. Yeah, Greg, hi.
Yes, thank you, long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm still not used to this whole, we used to raise hands because it wasn't it was just audio, right? And I know Kent is just amazed, what is Greg doing? Okay, so I have a question, and this is sort of just as far as qualification. I'm somebody that wants to get into international education, and I find out and I listen to this episode, and I say, hey, I'm just going to go for my IQTS. Do I have to have a certain level of education? Do I have to have a degree from a recognized place? What is it going into this, for example, right?
So we have a team in the background who do amazing work for us, and they put it through a system that basically tells you what your qualification equates to in terms of a UK degree. So there are certain parts of the world where you will get a 3-year undergraduate degree, but it won't be the equivalent to a 3-year undergraduate degree in the UK, and that creates a little bit of a stumbling block sometimes. But not always. What tends to happen is you need to have an undergraduate degree. So you would need to have an undergraduate degree from doesn't have to be from the UK though. It could be from anywhere.
So from other countries, there's some more vetting that goes on with different countries, and the team goes through it, and then they'll notify you whether you need to take some more education courses and to get to the level before they can go for the certification.
Yeah,
correct?
So I guess if there's anybody sitting listening to this now and thinking, oh, I wonder if my degree isn't
hundreds.
Greg's mom.
Yeah,
my mom listens. Yeah.
Greg's mom.
Hi, Greg's mom.
No, yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, if anybody's listening who it might apply to them, I'm sure there's thousands of people listening. Don't worry, Kent.
And I hope so. Thousands of Greg's moms out there.
That was never in question, I promise. If you are listening and you are thinking, I don't know if my degree would be, certifiable enough to get onto the program, then we would just encourage everybody to apply anyway, and we go through that process quite early on. So you would never get to sort of the point where the program's about to start and then you suddenly find out, oh, my degree isn't actually of a high enough quality, quote unquote.
And are there courses they can take from distance to sort of bring them up to speed? Or do they have to do something in their own country, do you think?
It would vary. So we have sometimes we can I don't want to say bypass rules necessarily, but we can bend things slightly. So if there's a person who comes to us who may not have their undergraduate degree may not reach the same level as a UK recognised undergraduate degree, but they've got lots and lots of experience in the classroom, then we would immediately say, can we just look into this in a bit more detail, and maybe we can overlook it based on experience. So there's always leeway when it comes to it. It's not a hard and fast rule with regards to that, but there are also options around. They could go on to do like a top-up degree potentially. We wouldn't necessarily get too involved in that because it would be very bespoke depending on what their experience is. It may be that we say just keep working in schools and keep building up your experience, and then come back to us in a couple of years once you've got that additional experience in the classroom. It's quite varied. As you can imagine, we, with 500 people coming to us to teach, to do their teacher training, we get people from all over the world. So we get people who are, we go all the way to Bermuda, Barbados, all the way across to our biggest market in Hong Kong and China.
The old British Empire, if you will.
We'll have to send a letter of apology to those countries
I'd like to officially apologize.
We're not always that serious. Oh my God.
Greg, I have a curiosity. In the United States, the relationship between the United States government and American international schools is a very informal relationship, which usually only involves some grants of money that go from the U.S. State Department into our international schools. It's not really a formal process, or even, I would say, a terribly transparent process. But I think in the UK, you have the British Council, and you have a much more structured system of British education abroad. I was wondering if you could just say a few words about that. And do most British teachers end up working for a British Council school overseas?
So it's an interesting one because you're right. We have British schools overseas, BSO schools, who are officially recognised as being the equivalent to a state school in the UK. And it's interesting because when you do the IQTS, there's only certain schools where you can build that ECT that I talked about earlier, the early careers teacher. There's only certain schools, and BSO schools are those schools where you can, do that 2-year ECT period. But it's actually what we find quite often is a lot of even our British teachers who come through us, they won't necessarily be in British schools overseas. I suspect that most BSO schools, they recruit from the UK coming over, or from other BSO schools quite often. So I don't know if there's a real correlation between British teachers who are teaching overseas and teaching in British schools overseas.
You're saying BSO, that's British schools overseas? Is that a department for the government?
The BSO schools are linked through the Department for Education, I believe, and the British councils. So
and accredited through BSO.
So the BSO schools are they're treated the same way that you would treat a British school in the UK in terms of inspections and all of the sort of stuff that we have in the UK schools.
I think you mentioned the UAE, and I've heard the UAE has a lot of those BSO accredited schools, and they're one of the draws for British citizens or British teachers to go to the UAE is that they can get that their years of experience still counted at a school in the UAE, and then go back to the UK seamlessly and have those years counted towards their seniority.
That's exactly
is that right?
it. Yeah, and that's kind of the ECT aspect as well. It's building up that you're building up through the ladder almost of experience in schools. The UAE is quite a common one, but there are other parts of the world as well. So there is BSO schools in Thailand, Vietnam, etc. as well.
So I have a question. Are your students going to be actively teaching while they're taking your 1 year? It's the 1 year, right? So are they actively teaching, a lot of them, while they're taking your course so that they can submit like classroom artifacts and experiences and relate to each other and then do everything online together? Is that sort of the picture that you have? And a follow-up question would be, do they have to do like a portfolio or big project culminating for the end of that year?
It's a great question, Greg. I think
I learned from Kent.
I think that's something that I probably have brushed over or not talked about enough, actually. But one of the differences that we have between our what we'd class as an on-campus PGCE, so the PGCE that we do in the UK, is that most of the trainees that we get in the UK, in fact, all of the trainees we get in the UK will be full-time students, so they won't be employed as teachers, and they've kind of taken that year out from employment, wherever that may be, to do just the teacher training qualification. That's very different with our international teachers, because as you can imagine, they've got bills to pay, they've got houses and flats and apartments and all of that stuff that they need to pay for. So they will 9 times out of 10, our trainees will be fully employed full-time teachers in international schools, and the school are just supporting them in doing the qualification. So they will be in schools. Those who aren't employed, they would have to have a school lined up to go into a placement. So all of our trainees have to be in a school of some description. So whether that's an employment base or a placement based, it doesn't really matter too much, but as you can imagine, the majority will be employed because, as I say, it's a lot easier for them to be already employed at a school. So they'll do, depending on the course that they are on, they'll do placements within that period, a set period of time, and that's where they'll collect their evidence, as you've said, towards a portfolio. So depends on the length of the course and the course that they're on. They'll all run for a year, but some of our courses will only require you to be teaching for 12 weeks. Some will require you to be in school for 120 days. So it kind of varies depending on the course that you're on. But you'll be given tasks by ourselves to do, which will collect evidence towards the British Teachers Standards, and that's kind of where we assess the teaching against the British Teaching Standards or the UK national standards.
And correct me if I'm wrong, do they not need a sponsor, or I don't know what you call it, but a senior teacher to supervise them on staff or at the school
so
that
we
they're
also
teaching
have we have a requirement that the school will provide a mentor. So the mentor is a more experienced teacher who will be able to support, provide advice. They'll do observations in the classroom. They'll complete the sort of weekly reviews, weekly observations. They'll put all of that into a portfolio online. They'll also potentially be observed depending on where they are in the world. We have professional practice tutors who are employed teachers teaching overseas who we employ to be university representatives, and they will go in and observe as well. So that means that they'll potentially get an external observation as well as their mentor. We also get to go out, people like myself and the lecturers on the team, we get to go out occasionally to visit certain parts of the world. So this year I was out in Saudi Arabia, and yeah, I know. So I was very interested to talk about Saudi Arabia because I was kind of surprised.
I'm not at all.
Oklahoma.
It's too hot. It's too hot. All right, let's take a moment for a little commercial about how to get in touch with us. You can, of course, find all 4 of us at the itpexpat.com. That's www.itpexpat.com.
Or you could also find us at email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Or if you're into Facebook, we have a new Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/ITPexpat, where you can find all kinds of inside information about ITP Expat.
You can also find us on Instagram at ITP Expats. That's with an S. ITP Expats is our handle.
All right, and thank you, listeners. We have over 100 countries represented by our listeners, and though we're not monetized, we are here for you, and we would like to thank all of you for listening. So let's get back to the show.
So I was in Riyadh. So I spent 6 days in Riyadh. Then I spent 7 or 8 days in Dubai. and then went across to Muscat in Oman for a couple of days as well. So yeah.
Hey! I taught in Muscat for 8 years. So the British School of Muscat, is that where you were?
No, interestingly not. So we had a trainee teacher in it was a business and science college, but they taught high school and through to further education. So it was interesting being out in the Middle East, seeing a totally different experience. The year before I was in Hong Kong, which is a more common visit for us, because as I say, that's our biggest market is Hong Kong and China.
That's awesome. You get to go to all these places, or you have the possibility of going to see these different schools. And the three of us have taught at different schools around the world. So it's exciting to, I guess you can feel our excitement when you got to go to Muscat or you got to go to Dubai. And there's so many schools in Dubai also, right? And there's a lot of schools in Riyadh.
Skip over Saudi Arabia, are you?
No. Well, you know. Anyway, I think it's great that you guys get to go and touch base with those candidates or those students, because it means a lot when someone comes to visit you after you set yourself up in a different part of the world teaching. So to have that connection face to face means a lot.
Absolutely,
I'm sure, to your students.
Yeah,
and
totally.
For you.
I mean, from our perspective, it's brilliant. We get to go out and see all of these really lovely places. Where I come from, I grew up in a really small mining village in sort of rural north of Newcastle. So for someone like me from that part of the world to be able to go and see to Hong Kong, to Saudi Arabia, it's unheard of. Yeah,
or Riyadh.
So for me, it's an opportunity that I don't overlook how lucky I am with that. But also, as you say, how fortunate the trainees that on our programs are. When I was out in Riyadh, they were so thankful that somebody from the university was actually coming out to see them. And it was, from my point of view, I thought I was the lucky one, and they thought they were lucky because they had somebody coming out to see them. So yeah, it's really nice. And it's really nice to be able to go into that classroom and see that teacher and see that the point when I went and observed, it was towards the end of the program, the end of the year. So for me and for them, it felt like a really nice culmination of the year and the sacrifice that they had made in getting through their PGC and their IQTS.
What percentage would you say are international teachers as far as international citizens? And what percentage are UK citizens trying to get their IQTS, maybe to return to the UK or not? But would you say it was that 50-50 for your students?
Off the top of my head, thinking about it, it's probably geared, although the program seems to be more geared towards British citizens, we kind of have probably, I would estimate maybe a 60-40 split towards international teachers. We get a lot of Irish teachers who are based in the Middle East, who are wanting to get the IQTS to be able to get back into Ireland in the future. So there's a lot of, we get a lot of Irish-based, UAE-based, Irish teachers on the IQTS as well.
Did and this might show my own lack of knowledge, when the UK kind of pulled out of the agreement with the EU, and did that affect the British teachers teaching in Europe at all?
I'm not actually sure, because I wasn't part of the team when that occurred. I would imagine it probably impacted a lot of people in terms of stress levels, naturally, but I don't think if you were already working in Europe when the UK pulled out of the EU, I think that it kind of didn't really affect you, because you could apply for full-time citizenship in whatever country you were in. I know, for example, the Republic of Ireland is still part of the EU, so for a lot of people who had dual citizenship of Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, or Republic of Ireland, UK, a lot of those people remained part of the EU through their Irish citizenship. Because I know a friend who her husband is Irish, and so she maintained her Irish passport through him and was therefore able to move to the EU still.
So, Greg, I think a lot of our listeners will be very curious about Newcastle, and they might be Googling Newcastle to find out exactly where you are, and because the University of Sunderland is in Newcastle, is that right?
Ooh, JP, you're going to have offended a lot of what we call Mackhams.
Oh, that's dangerous. Oh, no.
I hear another apology letter coming on.
That's Canadian ignorance right there.
Oh, no. Oh, wow. That's a third apology letter in one episode.
I
This
get
is
to
a
make
new
fun
record.
of JP.
Shots fired! Shots fired!
We're not even done yet. How
I'm
many
worried
more?
that I'm going to be held responsible for this as well.
We would like to announce that here at the ITP, our views are the individual views of each host and do not represent the opinions of our guests. Thank you. Back to the program.
You might have feelings of dizziness, faintness, headaches. All these disclaimers, Kent. All of a sudden we go video and we have to have disclaimers on there. I don't get it. This is new to us, Greg. We're not used to being online in video like this, so it's very strange. I mean, like, do we look okay? I mean, look at my. That doesn't stand for Newcastle. That's for Green Bay,
I'm loving it
Wisconsin,
because
right
actually
there.
I was going to talk about sports and that's kind of what I was linking into, but actually my NFL team is Green Bay, so yeah, I'm a big fan.
There you go. See,
you just
points
made the
right
single
there.
guy's day.
I think our episodes are going to shoot right up in our listenership now.
You
Well,
know,
Kent
it's the
is a
only team. Now, Americans will know this, but and maybe your fellow Brits might not. It's the only team that's owned by a city and not by an owner. So it is kind of a special team in that regard.
That is pretty
We're a very
unique,
special team.
particularly in this day and age where billionaires are building up. And again, we're going to go back to sport now because Newcastle, firstly, separate to Sunderland, JP, there's a big rivalry between Newcastle and Sunderland. I guess it's probably similar to...
So it's a city?
Oh,
Sunderland
yes, it
is a
is.
city?
They're football teams too.
That's 4 apologies, dear
Football
citizens of
teams.
Sunderland.
No, I'm finding this hilarious.
You know what?
It's a city.
We have a form letter where you just fill it out. It's okay. The apologies
Don't
already
worry,
written.
JP. I'm finding this hilarious because as somebody from Newcastle, as a Newcastle fan, there's a lot of like ribbing between us. So, JP, Sunderland is a city. I can confirm it is a city, but it's amusing to me because Newcastle and Sunderland, there's a big rivalry. I kind of would equate it similar to the Packers and the Vikings, because like two cities quite close together and lots of sport and rivalry. As a Newcastle fan, I found it hilarious that you didn't even know Sunderland was a city. As a Sunderland employee, I can't say that too much though. But yeah, Sunderland it's a smaller city, just south of Newcastle. Newcastle is kind of a bigger city. It's probably more globally recognised than Sunderland, but I recognise that Newcastle's probably not as globally recognised as, say, Edinburgh or London, somewhere like that. But yes, the beer is very famous.
That's
so,
true.
One of the biggest exports of Newcastle, other than brown ale, is probably our football team. Or soccer team. I do apologise. I'll use correct terminology for you guys.
We say football too.
Say football.
So Newcastle, Newcastle football team. We're kind of a mid-table team for a long time, but we recently got bought out by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. So that technically makes us, technically speaking, we are now the richest football club in the world.
What?
At first they bought the golfing, and now they're going into football too. Oh, the Packers we're never going to sell out.
Just he's putting that out there, is he?
Okay, so
way
the
to go.
Public Investment Fund. Okay, I
Wow.
got it. Yes.
Wow.
Okay.
So
do you
Newcastle's
see
soon going to be buying out all these best players around the world because they
we
can
would
afford
love to
their
be
salaries?
able to, but unfortunately, football has a financial fair play system, which means it's a bit like in the MLS in the US. They have salary caps, so you can only pay players a certain amount.
Yep.
In Europe, it's based on how much income from investment, from sponsorships. So at the minute, Newcastle although we have rich owners, can't spend a lot of money because we aren't making enough money from the club itself. So yeah, it's a funny system they have at the minute. But hopefully in years to come, we'll be like Manchester United or Manchester City, and everybody will know who we are. And that's when I'll be really pleased.
Well, just to get it back to the university, I think University of Sunderland is going to put Sunderland on the map then, because I have heard of University of Sunderland, maybe even more so than the city of Newcastle. So just to say that, you know, your university is growing the reputation, I think, for this city called
I've never
Sunderland.
heard of Sunderland beer, though. There's just it's not even on the map
yet.
there.
Not yet.
No. Well, you listen, if you let's see, I want to ask you a question here, not about international teaching, but I would like to ask you a question about your travels a little bit. You know, you've done some travels. Have you run into any police stories while you've been traveling? Anything sort of G-rated, something to share with?
Wait a minute. I might have to intervene there. I don't think we have enough time to go through Greg's police stories. Maybe just to pick a few of the top ones.
Not my police stories.
If we go through all of the guest stories, we might be here for a very long time. I've only known him for a short time, but I'm anticipating a very long list.
I wish I had some really cool police stories for you, and sadly I don't. I'm like the black sheep of my family. I'm one of the few people who hasn't had a skirmish or hasn't had a run in with the law. I'm clearly I'm too straight laced and good for that sort of thing. You know, maybe the single guy could tell me one of his in replacement though.
He gets new ones every week. We just haven't shared them yet.
I have so many, you know. But we like to choose them. You don't have to choose one anyway. We have custom stories too. Like I tried to get a sprinkler, like a little, you know, there's little yard sprinklers, like they water the football fields with. The little plastic sprinkler. I bought a $5 one from the U.S. and I took it to Cambodia, and it gave me an extra hour in customs because they couldn't figure out what it was. So I had to sit there while they're trying to, you know, when you bring things overseas or to another country that you know back in your home country, they may not understand what it exactly it is, and you don't ever want to give customs or border patrol any reason to stop you for any longer than possible, because you know it's already takes a while to get through. But the people behind me were not happy. I was not happy. I was just glad they didn't take me into a side room, right? We've had different guests talk about the side room episode where they have a little extra depth, you know, of investigation. But that's just a quick one that I had. It's very harmless, right? It's very harmless to bring back. Somebody had a garden up on top of their apartment in Cambodia, and they wanted to water the plants. So they brought one of these things, because usually it's just a guy holding a hose with their thumb, right? But
so
this
Greg,
is a new thing.
Do you have any custom stories?
No, but one thing I did pop in my head was thinking about when you go to certain countries and they have rules about certain things not being allowed that are quite unusual. I remember I went to Singapore and had a slight panic, like almost like heart attack moment, because it's banned to have chewing gum in Singapore, and I was like, have I got some extra in my pocket? I felt like I was like important contraband at this point. So I'm sat on this flight looking in my bag. I'm sure I've left some chewing gum in my bag, and I'm emptying everything, and it turned out I totally hadn't. I just, in my head, I was so worried that because I'd read Singapore, no chewing gums, like I can't have chewing gum, and then all of a sudden it was in my head like half an hour before landing, I think I've got chewing gum in my bag. Oh no.
I can just see the flight attendant going through the aisle and seeing you stuffing stuff in front of the seat. Like, what's the bubble gum going in front of it? What do you don't want that? I'll take it.
Yeah. Or walking around with one of those garbage bags. Okay, I'll take your
Give us all your chewing gum. Yeah.
Well, you know who took his chewing gum was the exotic animals he was sneaking in Singapore.
It was the snake.
It was the snake. Oh, we could have a whole episode about snakes sometime. Before we get to the next question that we usually ask our guests, Greg, you're a fellow podcaster. I was wondering if you could plug your podcast and let our audience know how we might be able to, and it might still be developing right now, but where can we find your podcasts.
Yeah,
In the
absolutely.
future.
So we have at the university we have a podcast called SUNRAE, and that's Sunderland, and then RAE, and it's a research based podcast where our trainee teachers are encouraged to come on and talk about the research and that research that they're doing in the classroom as part of their PGC and IQTS. I've since taken on and tried to expand that a little bit, and I'm trying to get some of our trainees to come on and talk about their experiences teaching overseas. So as you say, that's at the moment it's a work in progress, but that should be available. I will find the link and share it with you, so you can share it with your listeners if they are interested in listening to that. But yeah, that would be
Fantastic. Yep. Keep an eye out for that link. ITP crowd. Dial
So
in
just
and
to
listen
clarify,
yeah.
SUNDREE.
No, so it's SUNRAE, SUNRAE.
SUNREE.
Yeah.
No D.
RAE. R as in radar, A as in apple, E as in E.
Elmo.
Elmo. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Okay.
SUNRAE. Yeah,
Okay.
SUNRAE. And that's the one that you're going to be taking over, and we could find sort of your expanded format in the future where you bring on teachers from inside and outside the program to talk about
Yeah, absolutely. So
their
it'll be a
work.
mixture of people talking about their research in the classroom and people talking about their experiences living and teaching in different parts of the world. So the first episode that I've done, I've already recorded, is somebody who is from Yorkshire, interestingly, JP, but lives out in China and has lived in near Guangzhou for I think he said around about 10 years. I can't remember now. A long time though. And it's just him talking about his experience of teaching over in China. And one of the things that I asked him, which is going to be a bit like your police story question, I asked him about what's the one thing that he struggles to get from back home over in China. And he gave the answer of Bovril. So I don't know if, are you familiar with Bovril?
Bovril, the
Yeah,
gravy
it's
maker.
basically a gravy that you drink. Yeah, I can.
Wow, and that's a UK product that many
So British are famous for tea. We love cups of tea, and it's kind of like an offshoot of a cup of tea. It's a cup of Bovril, and it's like a savoury gravy style drink that you'll drink hot. Yeah.
See, I always thought you used Bovril to make gravy. Like it gives that gravy a certain flavor that is consistent.
It's its own drink.
No, like beef granules. Because I always remember my British friends in Muscat, they were always bringing back beef granules to standardize when they want bangers and mash. They want sausage and mashed potatoes with the gravy. Bovril, Bovril, Bovril. This episode is sponsored by Bovril.
This is the cat guy letting Newcastle, Sunderland, the UK know that your apology letters are on the way, signed by the ITP podcast. I would like to thank my co-host, JP Mint. You can find her at jpmintconsulting.com. Thanks, JP.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank my co-host, the single guy. You could find his book, International Teaching, The Best Kept Secret in Education, at www.amazon.com or wherever you find your finer books. Thanks, single guy. And I'd like to thank our very special guest, Greg Larmouth. He is at the University of Sunderland. You could find his upcoming podcast at SUNRAE. That's SUNRAE. Check that podcast out. We're all very excited about that. You could also find him on X, formerly Twitter, at Greg_Larmouth. Check that out and follow his travels. Thank you very much, Greg. And I'm Ket the Cat Guy. You can find me this year in room 303. We'll see you next time.
Greg, I have a request. 3 words, Greg. Can you say winter